always thought I knew who I was until my mother's death changed everything. For 58 years I had been Sarah Mitchell, daughter of Eleanor and James Mitchell, sister to no one, wife to Robert for 32 years, and mother to 2 grown children who rarely called. I was the woman who organized the library fundraisers in our small town of Mapleton, who baked the best apple pie at the county fair 3 years running, and who never missed Sunday service at First Presbyterian. That was me, predictable, reliable Sarah. Until I wasn't. Mom had been gone for 3 weeks when I finally mustered the courage to clean out her modest bedroom in the little house she'd lived in since Dad died 12 years ago. Robert offered to help, but this was something I needed to do alone. Mom and I had always been close, closer than most mothers and daughters, I suspected. We shared the same chestnut hair, though mine was now colored to hide the gray, the same slight build, and the same love of gardening and old mystery novels. Dad had been the odd one out with his towering height and booming laugh. I never quite inherited his piercing blue eyes or his outgoing nature. Mom always said I was like her, introspective, cautious, with feet planted firmly on the ground. Some treasures are meant to be kept hidden, she once told me while putting away her jewelry box after showing me Grandma's pearl earrings. I thought she was talking about valuables. Now I wonder if she was preparing me. The cedar chest at the foot of her bed was where Mom kept her most precious possessions. I had seen inside it many times over the years. Photo albums, knitting patterns, Dad's military medals, my childhood drawings. But that day, as I emptied it to prepare for donating her things, my fingers found a false bottom at the back corner. A secret compartment in my mother's most personal space. My heart raced as I pried it open. Inside lay a small leather-bound diary with a simple brass lock. The key hung from a thin chain next to it. The diary's cover was worn, the pages yellowed with age. The dates inside spanned from January to December 1964, the year before I was born. I settled onto Mom's bed, the familiar scent of her lavender sachet still clinging to the quilt, and began to read. January 15, 1964. James has been deployed again. 3 months this time. The house feels so empty without him. Martha invited me to the community dance to cheer me up. I told her I shouldn't, but she insists I can't sit alone every night until spring. Innocent enough. I flipped forward several pages. February 8, 1964. I met someone tonight. His name is Daniel. He's new in town, working at the university as an art professor. His eyes are the warmest brown I've ever seen, like autumn leaves in sunlight. We danced 3 times. I shouldn't have enjoyed it so much. My breath caught. I had never heard my mother mention anyone named Daniel. With trembling fingers, I continued reading. Entries detailed innocent meetings that grew into something more. Coffee after her shift at the diner. A walk by the lake. His sketches of her hands, her profile. All while Dad was overseas. April 17, 1964. What have I done? James comes home in 2 weeks. And I'm carrying another man's child. Daniel wants me to leave with him. Says we could start over somewhere new. But how could I do that to James? He's a good man. He doesn't deserve this betrayal. The diary slipped from my fingers and fell to the floor. The woman in these pages wasn't my cautious, proper mother. And more shocking, the implication was unmistakable. James Mitchell wasn't my father. Part 2. I sat frozen on Mom's bed for what felt like hours, the diary lying open on the floor where it had fallen. Outside, the afternoon light began to fade, casting long shadows across the faded floral wallpaper. My mind raced with questions, each one more unsettling than the last. If James wasn't my biological father, then who was I? Had Dad known? Was this Daniel still alive? Did he know about me? With shaking hands, I picked up the diary and continued reading. April 30th, 1964. I told Daniel today that it's over. He begged me to reconsider, said we could be a family. But I've made my choice. James comes home tomorrow. I will be the wife he deserves. This mistake will remain my secret burden to bear. Asterisk. May 10, 1964. Asterisk. James was so happy to be home. He swept me into his arms the moment he stepped through the door. I cried, and he thought they were tears of joy. In a way they were. I've decided this baby will be ours. James and I have been trying for nearly 2 years. He'll believe this is the miracle we've been praying for. Asterisk. June 15, 1964. Asterisk. I saw Daniel at the market today. He looked right through me, his eyes cold. I almost didn't recognize him. Later, a note was delivered to the house while James was at work. Just 3 words. Is it mine? I burned it immediately. Asterisk. The entries grew more sporadic after that, mostly documenting her pregnancy, my pregnancy, and her guilt. The final entry was dated December 3, 1964. Asterisk. James is so excited about the baby. He's painted the nursery yellow and built a beautiful crib. Sometimes when he places his hand on my stomach to feel the kicking, I'm consumed by shame. But other times I believe this is right. This child will be loved. That's what matters most. Daniel has accepted a position at a university in Chicago. He leaves next week. It's better this way. Clean break. Fresh start. This diary ends here. Some stories shouldn't leave a trail. Asterisk. I closed the diary, my mind reeling. My birthday was February 20, 1965. The timeline fit perfectly. My entire identity had been built on a lie. I walked to the bathroom and stared at my reflection in the mirror above Mom's sink. The face looking back at me was suddenly unfamiliar. The shape of my eyes, the curve of my nose, the cleft in my chin that no one else in the family had. Were these his features? Had I been looking at pieces of this stranger, this Daniel, in the mirror my entire life? My phone rang, startling me out of my daze. It was Robert, wondering why I'd been at Mom's house for so long. I mumbled something about there being more to sort through than I'd expected. "Are you okay, Sarah? You sound strange," he said. "I'm fine," I lied, just as my mother had lied for nearly 6 decades. "I'll be home soon." I ended the call and returned to the bedroom. There had to be more. A photograph, a letter, something that could tell me who this man was. Daniel who? A university art professor in 1964. It wasn't much to go on, but it was a start. As I rifled through the remaining items in the cedar chest, a small envelope fell from between the pages of a photo album. Inside was a faded sketch on high-quality paper, a young woman with familiar features. My mother, perhaps 30 years younger than I'd ever seen her in photographs. At the bottom corner was a signature. Daniel Winters. Had a name. ### Part 3. The public library's microfiche collection became my second home over the next 2 weeks. Robert thought I was volunteering extra hours. Another lie added to the growing pile. I couldn't tell him yet. Not until I knew more. The university archives yielded what I was looking for on my 3rd visit. A faculty photo from 1964 showed a row of professors in the art department. And there he was, Daniel Winters. Tall and lean with wavy dark hair and a serious expression. The black and white photo couldn't show the warm brown eyes my mother had described, but I could see something else. My chin, my brow line. There was no denying the resemblance. According to university records, Professor Daniel Winters had indeed transferred to Chicago in December 1964, just as Mom had written. After that, the trail went cold. I expanded my search online, spending hours scrolling through social media and professional websites. Nothing. Either he had died or at nearly 85 years old. He wasn't the type to maintain a digital presence. Just when I was about to give up, a small gallery exhibition announcement from 3 years ago caught my attention. Retrospective. 6 Decades of Vision by Daniel Winters, at a gallery in Burlington, just 2 hours away. The article mentioned the renowned local artist would be present at the opening. Local. He hadn't stayed in Chicago. He had come back, or perhaps had never actually left. Had he been here, in the periphery of my life, all this time? The gallery still existed. With trembling fingers, I dialed the number. "Lakeside Gallery," a cheerful voice answered. "Hello, I'm calling about Daniel Winters," I said, my voice surprisingly steady. "I understand he exhibited there a few years ago." "Oh yes, Daniel's work is exquisite. In fact, we still carry several of his pieces. Are you interested in a purchase?" My heart pounded in my ears. Actually, I was hoping to get in touch with him directly. It's rather personal. I see. Well, I don't normally give out contact information, but Daniel teaches a senior workshop at the community center every Wednesday. Perhaps you could meet him there. Tomorrow was Wednesday. 24 hours until I would potentially meet the man who had given me half my DNA but none of his presence in my life. That night I couldn't sleep. I lay awake beside Robert, listening to his gentle snoring, wondering how to tell him that the woman he married wasn't who either of us thought she was. "What's going on with you lately?" he had asked at dinner. "You've been distracted since you started clearing out Eleanor's house." "Just processing grief," I'd told him. Not entirely untrue. The next morning I dressed with unusual care. A blue blouse that Robert always said brought out my eyes, a touch of lipstick. I told him I was going to meet an old friend for lunch. The lies were becoming easier. Was that how it started for Mom too? The community center was a modern building with large windows overlooking a small park. My hands were clammy as I parked and checked the directory. Senior Art Workshop. Room 112, 10 to 12 o'clock. It was 11:30. Soon the class would end, and I would come face to face with my biological father. What would I say? "Hello, you don't know me, but you had an affair with my mother in 1964. And surprise, I'm the result." I waited in the hallway, watching the clock tick slowly forward. At 5 minutes to noon, the door opened, and seniors began filing out, carrying canvases and art supplies. I pressed myself against the wall, scanning each face. And then he appeared. Even at his age, Daniel Winters commanded attention. Tall despite a slight stoop, with a full head of white hair and those eyes warm brown, just as my mother had described. He was laughing at something a student had said, his eyes crinkling at the corners. I stood frozen, unable to approach. This stranger was my father. He had my hands, artist's hands with long fingers. How had Dad never noticed that I, with no artistic talent to speak of, had the hands of a painter? Daniel glanced in my direction, his eyes passing over me with polite disinterest before returning to his conversation. He didn't recognize anything of himself in me. Why would he? He had never seen me before. Courage failing, I turned and fled to my car, tears blurring my vision. Part 4. For 3 days, I avoided making any decisions. I went through the motions of daily life. Cooking dinner, attending a garden club meeting, calling my daughter to check on the grandkids, all while carrying the weight of my unspoken truth. "You got another letter from the Historical Society," Robert said on Friday evening, handing me an envelope. Something about the town's bicentennial celebration. I served on the Historical Society board, helping plan events for Mapleton's upcoming 200th anniversary. Inside the envelope was an invitation to a planning dinner at Riverside Restaurant next Thursday. Among the committee members listed was a name that made my blood run cold. Daniel Winters, Arts Committee Chair. Course. An artist with deep roots in the community would naturally be involved. Our small town kept pulling us into each other's orbits, unaware of the seismic secret between us. "I need to go," I said suddenly. Robert looked up from his newspaper. "To the dinner? I thought you might." "No. I need to go now." I grabbed my purse and car keys. "Sarah, what's going on with you?" Concern etched Robert's face. Paused at the door. My husband of 32 years deserved better than the fragments of truth I'd been offering. "When I get back, I'll explain everything. I promise." The address wasn't hard to find. The local art scene was small, and Daniel Winters was somewhat of a celebrity within it. His home was a converted old farmhouse at the edge of town, set back from the road among mature oak trees. As I pulled into the gravel driveway, my resolve nearly faltered. What right did I have to disrupt this man's life? But then I thought of all the birthdays, graduations, and Christmases he had missed, unknowingly or by choice, and anger gave me strength. The front door was opened by a woman perhaps 10 years younger than me, with silver-streaked black hair and kind eyes. "Can I help you?" she asked. I hadn't considered that he might not be alone. "I'm looking for Daniel Winters. Dad's in his studio. May I ask what this is regarding?" This woman was his daughter, my half-sister. The realization hit me like a physical blow. "It's personal," I managed to say. "My name is Sarah Mitchell." Recognition flickered across her face. "From the Historical Society. Dad mentioned you're working on the bicentennial together. I'm Catherine. Come in. I'll show you to the studio." She led me through a home filled with artwork and comfortable, well-worn furniture. The back of the house opened to a large sunroom converted into an art studio. And there he was, working at an easel, his profile silhouetted against the late afternoon light. "Dad, you have a visitor. Sarah Mitchell from the Historical Society." Daniel turned, and for the second time, I stood face to face with my biological father. Up close, the resemblance was even more striking. "Ms. Mitchell," he said pleasantly, wiping his hands on a cloth. "What brings you here? The meeting isn't until next week, is it? Could we speak privately?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. Catherine looked between us curiously but excused herself. When the door closed behind her, silence stretched between us. "I know who you are," I finally said. "Or rather, who you are to me." Confusion crossed his face. "I'm afraid I don't follow." My hands trembled as I removed the folded sketch from my purse, the one he had drawn of my mother all those years ago. "You knew Eleanor Mitchell in 1964. His face went ashen as he took the sketch with unsteady hands. "Where did you get this?" "She kept it hidden all these years, along with a diary that explained everything." Daniel sank onto a stool, his eyes never leaving the drawing. "Eleanor," he whispered. "I haven't heard that name spoken aloud in years. She died last month." He closed his eyes briefly. "I'm sorry to hear that. She was special." "She was my mother," I said pointedly. His eyes, my eyes, lifted to meet mine. Understanding dawned slowly, followed by disbelief. "That's not possible. Eleanor told me she lost the baby." The floor seemed to shift beneath me. "What?" "In her last letter, she wrote that she had miscarried. That's why she wouldn't see me before I left for Chicago." His gaze intensified as he studied my face. "She lied to me." Part 5. We moved to the living room, both of us needing the comfort of softer surroundings for the conversation that followed. Catherine brought tea, her curious glances suggesting she sensed something momentous was occurring, though she discreetly left us alone. "I came back after 3 years in Chicago," Daniel explained, his hands cradling the teacup as if drawing warmth from it. "I told myself it was for the position at the local college, but in truth I needed to know if Eleanor was happy, if she had made the right choice." "And did you find out?" "Yes. I saw her once, at the summer festival. You were there, a little girl about 2 years old, holding her hand. James was carrying you on his shoulders later." His voice grew distant with the memory. "You were wearing a yellow dress with daisies on it. You looked happy, all of you." A photograph of exactly that scene sat on my bookshelf at home. The knowledge that he had been there, watching from a distance, sent a chill through me. "Did you know?" "Yes." "Did you suspect I might be yours?" He shook his head slowly. "Eleanor wrote to me specifically to say there was no child. I believed her. I had no reason not to." He paused. "I married Catherine's mother the following year. We built a life here. I never spoke to Eleanor again, though we saw each other around town occasionally. Small communities," he said with a sad smile. "Hard to avoid people entirely." My whole life, you were just the man who judged the art show at the county fair or whose paintings hung in the bank lobby. We probably exchanged pleasantries at town events dozens of times. The absurdity of it struck me suddenly. How many times had we stood in the same room, neither of us knowing the truth? Does your husband know why you're here? Daniel asked. Not yet. I needed to see you first. To understand. He nodded. And James? Did he ever know the truth? I don't think so. He died 12 years ago, still believing I was his daughter. He was a good father. I said this defiantly, almost accusingly. I'm sure he was, Daniel said quietly. I wouldn't want to diminish that, Sarah. He raised you. He loved you. That makes him your father in all the ways that truly matter. The simple grace of his response deflated my anger somewhat. I had come prepared for denial or perhaps indifference, but not for this gentle acceptance. I have questions, I said. Medical history, for one thing. And I'd like to know about your family. My family, I suppose. Of course. He hesitated. Would you like to meet your sister? Catherine should know. My sister. The word felt foreign on my tongue. After a lifetime as an only child, I suddenly had a sibling. Before I could answer, the front door opened and a male voice called out, Hello? Where is everyone? I brought dinner. Daniel's face softened. And that would be your brother, Michael. 2 siblings. My world, which had tilted on its axis 3 weeks ago, was now spinning completely off course. Daniel rose, a new resolve in his bearing. Stay for dinner, Sarah. Meet your family. We have 58 years to catch up on. For a moment, I thought of Robert waiting at home, of the explanations I owed him. But those could wait a few more hours. Right now, a part of me that had always felt missing, a part one hadn't even recognized was absent until the diary revealed its absence, needed to be found. I'd like that, I said. Part 6. Catherine's confusion turned to shock when Daniel explained who I was. Michael arrived moments later, a man about my son's age with Daniel's height and artistic temperament. Both siblings stared at me with undisguised curiosity. I can see it now, Catherine said, studying my face. Something in the eyes. The hands too, Michael added. Dad's hands. Dinner was surreal. This instant family sharing a meal as if we could compress decades of separation into a single evening. They told me about their mother, Rebecca, who had died 5 years earlier. About their childhoods filled with art and music. About Daniel as a father. Patient, creative, occasionally absent-minded. I shared stories of my own life. My children, my volunteer work, the quiet contentment of my marriage to Robert. But I also spoke of Eleanor, painting a fuller picture of the woman they knew only as a character in a long-ago romance. She was kind, I told them. Principled, except for the affair, Daniel finished gently. People contain multitudes, Sarah. One mistake doesn't define a life. When it was time to leave, Daniel walked me to my car. The night air was cool, and stars punctuated the clear sky above the old farmhouse. I'd like to paint you, he said suddenly. If you're willing. I've unknowingly missed 58 years of your face. I'd like to capture it now while I can. The request touched something deep within me. I'd like that. What will you tell your husband? He asked. The truth. All of it. He deserves that much. Daniel nodded. And your children. I hadn't thought that far ahead. Would this revelation change how my son and daughter saw themselves? Their grandmother. Me. One step at a time, I said. We stood awkwardly for a moment before Daniel opened his arms tentatively. I stepped into his embrace. My first hug from my biological father. It felt both strange and familiar, like returning to a home I'd never visited. I'm sorry I wasn't there, he whispered. You didn't know, I replied. Driving home, I rehearsed how to tell Robert. There was no easy way to explain that the woman he married carried a different history in her cells than the one she had always claimed. That our children's ancestry was not what we had told them. Robert was waiting in the living room, the television on but muted. He stood when I entered. "You've been crying," he said. I nodded, then took a deep breath. "I need to tell you a story. It starts with my mother's diary and ends with dinner at a stranger's house tonight. We talked until dawn. Robert listened, asked questions, held my hand when tears came. His steadiness was the anchor I needed as I navigated these churning waters of identity. "Do you feel different?" he asked as pink light began to filter through the curtains. "Yes and no," I answered truthfully. "I'm still Sarah. Still your wife, still mom to our kids. But there's this whole other branch of my story that I never knew existed." "What happens now?" he asked. I thought about Daniel's offer to paint me, about Catherine's invitation to her son's college graduation next month, about Michael's enthusiasm to compare our family photos, searching for genetic echoes across generations. "Now we expand," I said. "Our family gets bigger. Our history gets more complicated. And I get to know the other half of myself." "I'm with you," Robert said, squeezing my hand. "Whatever you need." As morning broke over our home, I felt a strange peace settling over me. The shock and anger were giving way to something else. Curiosity, perhaps. Or acceptance. My mother had kept her secret until death, carrying the weight of her choice alone for decades. But she had also left me the means to discover the truth. Hidden yet findable. Perhaps that was her final gift to me. The chance to know myself completely. I am still Sarah Mitchell. Wife, mother, daughter of Eleanor. But I am also something new. Daughter of Daniel, sister to Catherine and Michael, carrier of artistic hands that finally make sense. The stranger in the mirror isn't a stranger anymore. She's just me, all of me at last. The end.